Joined by Frank Ledwidge in the studio, Senior Lecturer of Strategy and Law at the University of Portsmouth, barrister, former British military intelligence officer who served in the Balkans, Iraq and Afghanistan, and he's the author of Aerial Warfare and the best-selling Battle for the Skies and Losing Small Wars, British Military Failure in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's also been back and forth in recent years to Ukraine, assessing the military situation. Welcome to France 24, Frank. First of all, Victory Day today, the annual military parade. Whether we see it in Paris, Pyongyang, Washington, or in Red Square, it is usually synonymous with a show of strength, technological might, the power propaganda on show. What are you making of what we've just seen today?
Well, good evening, Gavin. Yes, it's low-key, this. Last year was the big one, as it were, being the centenary, and this one rather more downbeat, partly probably, as you suggest, because of the risk of a potential Ukrainian crashing of the party. I thought that might be a little unlikely, in fact, because of the way Ukrainians also treat Victory Day, which for them, like for us, was yesterday. But nonetheless, I don't think that for Russians, this would have gone unnoticed, this low-key, quite downbeat approach. And, of course, the fact that there was a ceasefire, and there needed to be a ceasefire because, of course, there was that possibility of the Ukrainians crashing the parade.
One thing that strikes me, and I've heard different takes. On Russian state TV, there was some talk about the ability of Ukraine, and some intelligence analysts saying the same thing, increasing every year its missiles, its drones. And we're seeing some of the effect on oil facilities, aren't we? But not just for Red Square. If they wanted to target Putin, unlike years gone by, the efficiency, the technological might is actually doable for Ukraine. Now, whether or not they choose to do that is a different thing. What you're saying is, there's two things going on. Could they do it, and would they do it?
Yeah, motivation and intent. They could. It'd be pretty lucky for them to strike a strategic target like Putin. And I do think there's a risk here of us becoming a little bit overborne with Ukrainian drone capabilities. Let's take, for example, what's going on in Iran now. The Americans and Israelis have struck about 30,000 targets over the last 3 months. With significantly more sorties, and haven't taken apart Iran's capabilities yet. They probably have the capability to do so. We'll see. Kosovo, we had 10,000 targets and 30,000 sorties. The Ukrainians can't gather anything like that amount of power. But what they can do is intrude into what's called the narrative domain, which is where you and I are now, Gavin, which is the way we talk about things and the way that the Ukrainians can affect the way that we think. Of course, the Russians can do the same, but of course, I think, at least for our side, as it were, the Ukrainians very much have the edge. And their ability, if they choose to do this kind of thing, very much improves their situation in the narrative domain. That's aside from the military capabilities themselves. And as you say, of course, they have increased those drone capabilities, and I suspect a lot of that is down, frankly, to Western intelligence capabilities, which are being, much of information from which is being passed to them. There's no doubt about that.
So it's trying to work out the rhetoric versus the reality. It may be very hard to know, but if Ukraine wanted to target Putin, is it an overstatement to say, actually, something like this they could do?
Yeah, they could. They need to be pretty lucky, and it would. And I think into that calculation would go, well, what would the Russians do in response? Those of us who've been to Kiev, and there are many people watching, of course, either live in Kiev or been there, will know that in the centre of the city is relatively safe. That square mile or so, a couple of square kilometres in the centre has been struck a few times, but has largely been left untouched. Now, that includes the presidential palace there and some of the more key governmental centres. Ukraine doesn't want those attacked, and I suspect that kind of calculation goes into whether they'd be willing to strike Putin himself, even if they were capable of doing so. All this is speculation based on observation. That's as far as we can go on it.
When you look at your back and forth to Ukraine over the past few years, to Kyiv, to Kharkiv, elsewhere, and you're looking at military ability, just tell us some of the key takeaways more recently that you've had, because when we're taking in this information to say, for example, Ukraine's ability, that it's it's producing a surplus of some areas of weaponry, more than 50%, that they can start to export. So you're suddenly thinking, okay, they've got ability and cadence now, they've got frequency. But looking at the strength of the technological strength, just talk us through kind of a layman's sense of how you see things.
Yeah, that's a great point. This ability to ramp things up when they wish, but the ability to do so when required. And what struck me, particularly my last visit, which was only a couple of weeks ago, was that what they're doing and what they're actually doing, and what we in the West, in France, in the UK, in the US aspire to do, is have a true integrated approach to their defence industries. Their superb civilian industries are being fused with the military requirements. Now, a lot of this has happened organically and continues to happen organically. So, for example, units or groups of units will approach certain companies, they're given budgets, and those companies will provide them with certain capabilities. I'm thinking here particularly in the drone and electronic worlds. So you have the very best, most practiced, the most sharpened skills that the Ukrainians possess, best in the world, I think, at the moment in terms of drone technology, applied where they're required very, very quickly in a way that we can only dream of in the West, because they have that fusion between industry and the front line that we simply don't have. We aspire to it, but we don't have. And that was very evident to me in my last visit. Ukrainians right now reckon that they have about a 1.3 to 1 advantage over the Russians in terms of drones. And that sways from side to side as the months go on, because the Russians are no dupes either. And they have very strong capability, we all know, and they're evolving in the sort of brutal Darwinian environment of war as well. Right now, I think the Ukrainians have that edge, and that's showing on the battlefield a little bit. But what we haven't discussed, and I suspect, well, there's some very good reasons for that, are the true metric, which is relative casualties. But in terms of technology, I think, yeah, at the moment, the Ukrainians are ahead. They may lose that in the next couple of months, but they'll for sure regain it. And the reason for that is they apply all those national efforts to the war effort, to the front line.
And I guess on the casualty rate, which we've looked at before, is a completely different framing of what it means to each leader and each government. And am I right to say that you've been looking at recent figures, but there is certainly the number, the attrition rate, the death rate for Russians on the front line is extremely high in the last few months. It's difficult to say. Frankly, both Ukrainian and Russian figures, well, neither Ukrainian nor Russian figures are credible. What we can say, I think, without fear of contradiction, is that the Russians can sustain those casualties right now, and the Ukrainians cannot. And in that sense, we're at loggerheads. It's not a stalemate. It's more like the situation we had 110 years ago in Verdun or the Somme, where both sides are smashing each other's manpower at very high rates. The rates possibly on one side unsustainable, we will see in the long or medium term. But underlying this, and this is really important, that's in a sense the material component of warfare. But from the moral component, what I can say is this, and it comes across very strongly in all visits to Ukraine that anyone's going to have, and that Ukrainians want an end to this, that's for sure. They want it to stop. They haven't run out of tears yet, but they will not run out of resolve. They're going to carry on until either they can't or until they achieve something that looks like success. There's no doubt about that. They won't give in, no matter what the casualties, I suspect. I want to ask you in a moment about why perhaps President Putin doesn't want to give in now and wants to keep pushing as well. But I want to turn to your reference to Verdun. And one thing that you will have looked at in the last 2 weeks and back and forth, and to get your military perspective on this, the difference. The front lines are no longer called the front lines. They're called the killing zones. They're killing zones for a reason, because of the drones, as we just talked about a moment ago. How just try to explain how you're visualizing that. What are we seeing in terms of in these kill zone? What's going on there? Are just buzzing with drones constantly? We've got bunkers where basically the teams piloting the drones are. How does it look on the battlefield?
Well, I've not been to the front line. I don't intend to go, but obviously I speak to people who have all the time. And conceptually, I come back to this First World War example quite a lot, Because we hear people say, well, we've never seen this kind of thing before, because we have. If you were to go into no man's land at Verdun, Somme, Passchendaele, Amiens, any of the major battles in the First World War, if you were to put your head up or walk around, you were going to be killed. Now, whether that's by artillery, by snipers, machine guns, mines, whatever, you were done for. And it's the same in the grey zone. So it's not called no man's land down there, it's called the grey zone. And into that grey zone, you'd be killed by the constantly present, the ever-present eyes of drones of both sides. The lines are soft in the sense that they're in flow all the time. That grey zone expands and contracts, but it's effectively a no man's land, and it's very, very like, I think, the First World War conceptually. In the First World War, the new weaponry were machine guns, accurate rifles, artillery, of course, above all. Then now it's drones, which are effectively guided artillery. That's what they are.
Very interesting. And one thing that you touched upon a moment ago is Ukraine's resolve. But if we look at President Putin right now, what's your take on just how the Iran war is serving him? And actually, probably he's having a good war when it comes to Iran.
Yes, I think so, for two obvious reasons. The first one is the flow of money coming into him from increased price of oil. So the Russian economy relies, I think, I'm no expert on this, are at about a $57 breaks even about $57, and they need more than that. And clearly, the price of a barrel of oil is twice that usually. So that's the first thing. Secondly, though, and in the medium term, possibly more important, is expenditure of munitions, which, by the way, is pleasing China very much. The Americans are expending munitions and have been at a huge rate. And of course, munitions that otherwise, many of them, would have been going to Ukraine. And that's affecting the medium-term prospects in some respects for some Iranian anti-aircraft capabilities. I just want to say, however, by conclusion on this point, the Ukrainians are developing their own really, really quickly, and they're putting it together in a way that we haven't seen for decades. Again, that civilian expertise combined with military requirements, and we see that in the air defense zone as well. But in terms of the Iran war, it is affecting them because those missile interceptors, the missiles themselves, they're being expended down in the south, whereas frankly, they should really be heading towards Ukraine.
Stay with us, Frank, because I'm really interested in your assessment. Let us bring in Nick for a moment. Nick Holdsworth is our correspondent in Berlin. Former Moscow correspondent. Nick, good to talk to you tonight as well. Just listening to Frank, it is a very interesting take. Just from your point of view, have you covered, when you were in Moscow, the Victory Day parades before, and what's your take on how different it is right now?
Well, it's a shadow of its former self. Back in the day when I was in Moscow, until shortly after the war started 4 years ago, it was a grand event with thousands of people thronging the streets of Moscow and thousands of troops and lots of heavy hardware. I remember watching the practice, the rehearsals the day or so before, and seeing huge nuclear missile carriers, tanks, personnel carriers, all kinds of hardware. That's completely absent. That was completely absent today. Normally this parade took about an hour and a half. Today it was over in 45 minutes. There was an emphasis on the current war. Of course, Putin evoked the last war, the great patriotic war, as the Russians call the Second World War. But he used that to evoke a push for victory, which will be Russia's, he told the people attending the parade and the troops. And he sat not with veterans of World War II, but with men who'd served in Ukraine. The other thing that is notable today, very few foreign leaders, just a few foreign leaders from the near abroad, as the Russians call the former Soviet Union. So you've got Lukashenko from Belarus, you've got Joskayev from Kazakhstan, and a few other foreign leaders. And interestingly enough, the Prime Minister of Slovakia was there too, although not at the parade. Robert Fico was in Moscow, but he laid out flowers at the tomb, or the flame rather, to the unknown soldier on the walls of Red Square. So very interesting, but much scaled down with huge security, internet blackout, and the Kremlin has acknowledged this was all to protect Putin. There is a palpable fear in the Kremlin that Putin could have been killed today by a Ukrainian drone strike. Just a few days ago, the Ukrainians hit a luxurious residential block just above Moscow on the Sparrow Hills, where the Moscow University is situated. It's on a street called Moskovskaya Ulitsa near the old film studios. Very elite address. That was hit by a Ukrainian drone. That's about, 6-7 kilometres from Red Square. If the Ukrainians can hit that building, they could hit Red Square too.
Nick, two thoughts that I'd like your take on. So firstly, VE Day, May the 8th, we see different European countries, France, the UK, elsewhere, marking the moment. Today, Victory Day in Russia. What happens and how is it marked in Germany, for one? And two, talk us through, there's been a joint press conference today, hasn't there? Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor, meeting with the Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson. Talk us through what they've been saying as well today.
Yeah, absolutely. In Germany, this is not a day which is marked, particularly last year, on the 80th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe. It was marked with a solemn ceremony and with a remembrance and of the German sense of gratitude, actually, towards the Allies for defeating Nazism and giving Germany an opportunity to become a democracy again. So this is not a day that is really marked publicly here at all. I mean, Germany, after all, was defeated in World War II. But it is a day on which people will remember, and there certainly will have been today in Treptower Park, where the huge Soviet War Memorial is. There would have been commemoration there. There would have been people from the Russian embassy and from the Russian community, quite a large Russian community in Berlin. Turning to Chancellor Merz, interesting. He's there in Stockholm. He has this joint press conference earlier today with Ulf Kristersson, and he emphasises that his recent comments that Trump took rather personally over the humiliation in Iran, he put those to one side and he addressed his comments to NATO. He said that this wasn't about troop numbers. We've just seen this week that President Trump wants to reduce troop numbers in Germany by 5,000, reduce the US presence here. Chancellor Merz said, no, it's not about numbers, it's about common security, it's about our common defined aims, and NATO defends not only Europe, but defends America. He stressed the importance of the NATO alliance, and he stressed the importance and his wish to continue to work with President Trump. He had less kind words for Prime Minister Fico of Slovakia, noting that he was in Moscow on this day when Russia celebrates not only the Great Patriotic War, but its war in Ukraine, which it calls the special military operation, its favourite, the Kremlin's favourite euphemism for that. Merz said he would be having words with Prime Minister Fico when he's back from Moscow. Whether that troubles the Slovaks or not, I don't know, but Merz is not very happy with his Slovak counterpart.
Nick, thank you. Good to hear you. As always, Nick Holsworth, our correspondent in Berlin. Frank, just listening to that, I'm minded to know how we always talk about NATO and NATO countries and the fear of perception of what comes next, the threat from Russia. From what, just listening to you a moment ago on Ukraine's ability and kind of the positives coming out of its technological might right now, are there reasons to be cheerful for Europe given the problems and the pressure with the US looking elsewhere at the moment?
Yes. All the British military people that I speak to, and I speak to them a very great deal, say that the time's come where the Ukrainians are going to be training us rather than us training them. And I think that's going to be a pattern going forward now into the next few years. And it's a very positive pattern. They know how to fight these wars, and frankly, we don't.
Really good to hear your thoughts tonight. Thank you, Frank. Thank you very much. Frank Ledwidge, Senior Lecturer of Strategy and Law at the University of Portsmouth, barrister, former British military intelligence officer who served in the Balkans, Iraq, Afghanistan, and author of the best-selling Battle for the Skies and Losing Small Wars, British Military Failure in Iraq and Afghanistan.